Imagine a voice rising from a continent long silenced, piercing through the noise of global powers with raw, unvarnished truth. This is the story of Ibrahim Traoré's powerful message, a message that echoed across the world, demanding that we stop and truly listen. If you find deep dives into global voices like this compelling, consider joining our community by subscribing. In lands bearing the weight of a complex history, under the relentless African sun, the nation of Burkina Faso breathes. It is a place where the colonial past intertwines with present struggles for sovereignty, where the resilience of the people is tested daily against challenges from within and without, a tapestry rich in culture, hope, and the persistent search for a self-determined destiny that escapes the shackles of external influences. In this scenario of profound contrasts and aspirations, an unexpected figure emerged, a young military leader whose rise to power was marked by turbulence, but whose voice, when speaking on the global stage, brought a clarity and boldness rarely seen, representing not only his country, but a latent sentiment in many nations of the global South, a yearning for respect and a reconfiguration of power relations that for centuries had been unequal. Ibrahim Traoré, his youth belying the gravity of his words, stepped onto an international stage with a demeanor that blended calm and unwavering determination. He did not bring the formalities or polished diplomatic speeches that often obscure the truth. Instead, his communication was direct, blunt, a reflection of the harsh and urgent realities facing his people and his continent, an authenticity that resonated deeply with those willing to listen beyond titles and positions. His message was not just a political statement, it was a cry, a rant that had been building up over generations. It was the voice of a people who felt exploited, marginalized, whose natural resources had been drained, whose narratives had been distorted, and whose dignity had been frequently compromised in global power schemes that cared little for the real well-being of ordinary people. A courageous denunciation of systemic structures that perpetuated dependency. The simple act of Traoré speaking in the format he did, in a public forum with global attention, was itself a powerful event. For a leader from a relatively small African country on the geopolitical stage to address major powers and global institutions with such candor, openly challenging established norms and exposing uncomfortable truths about how the world works, captured the attention of many who were hungry for a different perspective, a voice that would not bow down. The gravity of his speech was amplified by the historical context. Burkina Faso, like many African countries, has a history marked by external intervention, whether through direct colonialism, the Cold War, or post-independence economic and political pressures. Traoré spoke with an awareness of this past, using it as a basis for his argument that the present needed to be fundamentally different, a break with vicious cycles of subordination that undermined his country's ability to thrive autonomously. The audience, both present and global, tuned in through their screens, realized that they were not just listening to another politician reciting a speech. There was a palpable passion, conviction, and courage in his words, a clear willingness to face the discomfort that his message would generate in certain circles of power, preferring the unvarnished truth to the diplomatic expediency that often silences the voices of the most vulnerable in international arenas. It was as if time stood still for a few moments as he spoke, his words falling like stones into calm water, creating ripples that would spread outward. His youth might have suggested inexperience to some, but his message demonstrated a depth of understanding of global dynamics and an unwavering commitment to the sovereignty and dignity of his people that transcended his age. positioning him as an unexpected spokesman for a movement of renewal in Africa. The atmosphere at the time he delivered his speech was charged. There was anticipation, curiosity, and for some, certainly, apprehension. The world was accustomed to hearing careful speeches full of euphemisms and coded language, especially when it came to relations between the global North and South. Traoré chose the path of radical transparency, choosing clarity over ambiguity, which in itself was an act of strength and an indication of the seriousness of his intentions and the urgency he felt to convey the truth. Thus, the voice of Ibrahim Traoré has emerged not just as that of a leader of Burkina Faso, but as a symbol, a herald of a new era of African assertiveness, an era where the nations of the continent demand to be treated equally, where their resources are for their own development, and where their sovereignty is non-negotiable. A powerful call for the world to reassess its perceptions and practices towards a vibrant continent full of potential. The essence of Traoré's message lay in a clear and unequivocal revelation about the flaws and injustices of the global system as it exists today, particularly in its relationship with African nations. He spoke bluntly about how international financial agreements and structures, often presented as aid or cooperation, in fact perpetuate a cycle of dependency and exploitation, draining resources and undermining countries' ability to build their own economies sustainably and independently, a direct critique of neocolonialism in disguise. He pointed the finger at the hypocrisy of rich nations that, while talking about development and human rights, continue to benefit disproportionately from the resources and labor of poorer countries, using their economic and political power to dictate terms that favor their own interests, keeping African nations in a position of vulnerability, unable to dictate their own terms in global trade or control their own natural wealth, a dynamic he called unfair and unsustainable. The issue of sovereignty was central to his speech, not just as an abstract concept, but as the practical basis for any genuine development. Traoré argued passionately that no nation can truly prosper if it does not have full control over its own decisions, its own economy, and its own security, free from the interference and pressure of external powers seeking to impose their own agendas. A fierce defense of the right of his people to choose their own path without tutelage or coercion. He openly challenged prevailing narratives that portray African countries as passive recipients of aid or as perpetual basket cases in need of external rescue. Traoré presented a vision of Africa as a capable continent, rich in human and natural potential, eager to take control of its own destiny, in need not of charity, but of respect, a level playing field, and the freedom to negotiate on its own terms on the world stage, a bold redefinition of African identity in global discourse. The exploitation of natural resources was a particularly sensitive and emphatic point in his message. He spoke of the injustice of rich countries benefiting enormously from the minerals and other riches of African soil, while the people who live on this wealth remain in poverty, with little or no share in the profits. A direct denunciation of extractive practices that perpetuate inequality and prevent the wealth generated from benefiting local populations, demanding a more fair and equitable model. His speech resonated with the frustrations of many young Africans who see their countries as rich in resources, but struggling to provide basic opportunities, a disconnect that breeds disillusionment and resentment. Traoré gave voice to this generation, articulating their desire for a future where their work and the resources of their land contribute directly to their own progress and well-being, not to the enrichment of others, a legitimate aspiration for a more just future. The message contained an implicit but powerful call for African unity. Traoré suggested that only through solidarity and mutual cooperation could African nations truly withstand external pressures and build a prosperous future. He highlighted the continent's inherent strength when united, contrasting it with the vulnerability that arises from division and internal competition, a strategic vision for leveraging collective power in a multipolar world. He not only criticized the existing system, but also presented a vision of the future for Burkina Faso and, by extension, for other nations that share similar challenges. A vision based on self-reliance, endogenous development, national control over the economy, and the firm rejection of externally imposed models that have proven inadequate or harmful. A path outlined with conviction and hope. The clarity of his message was one of his greatest strengths. There was no complicated jargon or evasive language. The truths were presented in a straightforward and understandable way, making his speech accessible to a much wider audience than just diplomats and political analysts. This transparency increased his impact, as ordinary people around the world were able to understand the essence of his denunciation and the justice of his demands for equal treatment. In essence, Traoré's blunt revelation was a mirror he held up to the world, forcing it to confront the uncomfortable realities of global power relations and the lingering legacy of historical injustices. His message was not just about Burkina Faso. It was a universal call for dignity, equity, and the fundamental right of every nation to determine its own destiny, free from coercion or disguised exploitation. The power of Ibrahim Traoré's message lay not only in what was said, but in the manner in which it was delivered. His calm yet firm demeanor, his eyes that conveyed seriousness and conviction, and his tone of voice that, although controlled, carried the righteous indignation of one who speaks for many who have been silenced, created an aura of authentic power that transcended the formalities of protocol and captured the attention of audiences far beyond the corridors of power. There was no sign of hesitation or fear, despite direct criticism of some of the world's most powerful entities. This fearlessness on a global stage, coming from a leader of a country that faced and continues to face significant challenges, amplified the weight of his words, demonstrating that moral courage can be as potent a force as economic or military might. A reminder that truth spoken with conviction has a unique resonance. The emotional impact of her speech was immediate and profound for many. Those who felt represented, who saw their own frustrations and aspirations articulated so clearly, felt a surge of pride and hope. Her voice became a beacon for many in Africa and the global South, validating their feelings and giving them new energy to continue fighting for their own sovereignty and development, a catalyst for a sense of self-determination. For others, especially in the centers of power targeted by his criticism, the message may have been shocking or uncomfortable. Confronted with the stark reality he described, some may have felt the need to defend themselves, downplay the impact, or deflect attention. Yet the direct nature of his words made it difficult to simply ignore, forcing a reaction, even if only behind the scenes, to such an explicit denunciation. The response on social media and among the general public was massive. Videos of his speech were shared by millions, subtitled in multiple languages, and went viral, especially among young people and activists who saw his speech as a landmark. The ease with which his message spread online demonstrated the global thirst for authentic voices that challenge the status quo and speak unpopular truths to the powerful. This viral phenomenon highlighted the power of new media to bypass traditional filters and deliver direct, impactful messages directly to people. The resonance of Traoré's speech proved that there is a vast and engaged global audience for honest discussions about justice, equality, and the power dynamics that shape our world. An audience that values the courage to speak openly about sensitive topics. The solidarity expressed by other leaders and social movements in response to Traoré's speech was also notable. His message served as a rallying point for those who share a similar vision of a more just and equitable world, where nations of the global South have a stronger voice and a more prominent role in shaping their own future, an echo in other parts of the world facing similar challenges. It is important to note that global exposure has also brought challenges and dangers for Traoré. Speaking truth to power rarely comes without consequences, and his bold stance has undoubtedly attracted unwanted attention from actors who feel threatened by his vision and demands. The simple act of making such a statement requires immense personal courage, knowing that doing so could increase the vulnerability of oneself and one's country to various forms of pressure or retaliation. His speech was not just an isolated event. It was part of a broader and growing movement of African and global South assertiveness. Traoré has become, for many, a symbol of this new wave of leadership that refuses to accept imposed terms and is determined to forge an independent path, using its own wealth and strategic partnerships to achieve the development its people deserve. Thus, the power of Traoré's delivery and the global impact of his message lie in his ability to articulate deep and uncomfortable truths with courage and clarity, resonating with millions and serving as a catalyst for important conversations about justice, sovereignty, and the future of international relations in a rapidly changing world. The legacy of Ibrahim Traoré's powerful and revealing message is only just beginning to unfold, but it is clear that his words have planted seeds that will continue to grow. His speech does not offer immediate magic solutions to the complex challenges facing Burkina Faso and the African continent, but it does provide a crucial moral and strategic foundation. The unwavering assertion of sovereignty and the demand for mutual respect as preconditions for any sustainable and just progress, an essential starting point for change. The message serves as a powerful reminder to African nations themselves that their future is largely in their own hands. While external pressures are real and significant, the ability to resist them, to negotiate from positions of strength, and to build partnerships that truly serve their interests depends fundamentally on their own unity, determination, and effective governance, a call to internal responsibility. For the rest of the world, Traoré's message is both a mirror and a challenge. It is a mirror that reflects the persistent inequalities and exploitative practices that are too often swept. It is a challenge to global powers and international institutions to fundamentally reassess their approaches to Africa, moving from a posture of mentorship or exploitation to one of true partnership based on equality and mutual benefit, a call for a paradigm shift in international relations. The road ahead for Burkina Faso and other nations inspired by its message will undoubtedly be fraught with difficulty. Assertiveness comes at a price, and the determination to control one's resources and destiny can generate resistance and attempts at subversion from those who benefit from the status quo. Putting the vision of sovereignty into practice will require resilience, strategic intelligence, and the continued support of the people. A monumental task. Yet the hope that his message has ignited in millions of people is a powerful force in its own right. That hope can translate into greater civic engagement, pressure for change at home and abroad, and growing solidarity among nations that share the same vision of a more just and self-determined future. The resonance of his words suggests that the desire for a new global order is strong and widespread, a fertile ground for collective action. Traoré's message also highlights the importance of amplifying voices from the global south in international forums and global media. For too long, the narrative has been dominated by a few perspectives. The impact of his speech demonstrates that there is a hunger to hear directly from those on the front lines of global challenges and injustices, and that these voices have the power to change perceptions and inspire movements. The legacy is not just about a single speech, but about the broader movement it represents and energizes. It is about the growing determination in Africa and elsewhere to demand their rightful place on the global stage, not as passive recipients, but as active and equal actors, contributing to solving global challenges and shaping a future that benefits all, not just the few. His speech serves as a lasting reminder that the power of truth, spoken with courage and conviction, can transcend barriers and resonate deeply with human conscience. In a world where misinformation and evasive diplomacy often prevail, Traoré's clarity and honesty were a breath of fresh air, reaffirming the fundamental importance of speaking truth to power, regardless of the consequences. For those who have heard and been touched by his message, the path forward involves action and engagement. It means seeking to better understand the realities he described, supporting movements for justice and sovereignty around the world, and in our own spheres of influence, challenging the narratives that perpetuate inequality and exploitation. His message is a call to conscience and informed action, an invitation to be part of the change. Ultimately, the most profound legacy of Ibrahim Traoré's message may be his contribution to building a world where international relations are based on mutual respect, equity, and full recognition of the sovereignty of every nation. It is an ambitious future, but his voice reminded us that the journey towards it begins with the courage to speak the truth and the unwavering determination to fight for a more just world for all. If you felt the power of this story and believe in the importance of voices that challenge the status quo, please subscribe to the channel for more content like this. Leave a like if this analysis resonated with you and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your participation helps bring these powerful messages to even more people.